Welcome to our presentation on gender bias favoring women and bystander reactions to emergencies. This is based on the article Revisiting the Gender Relations Debate in the Violent Murder of Kitty Genovese, Another Side of Gender Bias Favoring Women and Bystander Reactions to Emergencies. This is by Grace Milinkovich, Bridget Honeyman, Dima Al-Yaqub, and Paige McMurray.
Through our analysis of this study, we covered the introduction done by Bridget, relevant studies by Dima, methodology by me, Paige, conclusions and limitations by Grace Milinkovich.
The bystander effect, according to Britannica, is the inhabiting influence of the presence of others on a person's willingness to help someone in need. Our case opens with the case of Catherine Genovese, who on the early morning of March 13, 1964, was murdered by Winston Moseley. The case was reported on a week later by the New York Times paper. In that article and another article published later by the New York Times, there were over-exaggerations regarding the bystanders. The article claimed there to be 37 bystanders present, with the headline stating 37 who saw murder didn't call the police. These over-exaggerations in the New York Times caused America to go into panic. And this case became swept up by the media. People were creating books and films that were based off the incident, and it became a sort of lesson to young women. A quote from the article says that Catherine Genovese provided a stark lesson of the cost of female independence, a reminder of the brutal price that would be extracted from a woman who boldly inhabits public space in their own terms. With all the attention the Genovese case was receiving from the media, it also became intriguing to analysts and researchers. People wanted to find a reason behind why so many people failed to provide aid, giving birth to the bystander effect, which will be covered in this paper. Years later, the New York Times revealed that they had exaggerated some of the facts within those articles. In reality, on the day of the murder, there were only a handful of people who were witnesses, and it was later revealed that the bystanders had no idea the situation was so severe. Many of them claimed they thought it to be a lover's quarrel, and for those who did perceive it as a dangerous situation, they had called the police or provided aid in alternate ways. The actual facts regarding the case call into question the validity of gender bias within bystanders, which is why it is important to look into additional studies. The main theory the article covers and is referred to is known as the bystander effect. To simply explain it again, it is when an emergency is occurring at a specific time and place, when people are gathering. The victim is less likely to receive help from anyone. In many cases, emergencies like the case presented in the article, both parties would be from the opposite sex. However, that is not the case all the time. More on gender is coming next. The bystander effect explains how victims are more likely to get help if there's a single person present with them than when they're around a huge crowd, like in the case of a robbery, for example. In many scenarios, bystanders who chose to not step in and help explained why they didn't intervene in case the parties involved were close to one another, felt embarrassed to help, or misunderstood the situation as an emergency. Another thing to point out, the article explained how sober people are less likely to jump in contrast with people who are intoxicated. Lastly, regarding gender, the article explained how women in lots of cases were the group targeted, like the case of Catherine Genovese, and men are less likely to receive help if the roles were reversed and the victim happens to be a male and the perpetrator a female. To further explain the bystander effect by itself, it goes back to the very same incident that was mentioned before, the assault and murder of Catherine Genovese in 1964. Sparked the interest of researchers who wanted to understand the reason why people could stand by and watch something so horrible happen in front of them, and as to why victims are always the ones to be blamed instead of society who chose to ignore them. Most topics that revolve around this phenomenon include ethical decision-making, second is the influence of social worlds, lastly taking responsibility, which links directly to the purpose of the article and research that was addressed on the next part.
Some of the methods used in this study included the review and analysis of dozens of New York Times articles published laying out the situation and discussing the absence of action. Private studies concentrated on the contribution of gender when it comes to bystander intervention. Laboratory experiments and real-life studies of video recordings from CCTV footage of the incident involving male and female perpetrators, victims, and bystanders. Methods used in this study were as follows. Qualitative research using the research paradigm. This was used in the analysis to achieve the why and how answers to the bystanders' reactions. According to the main source used in this analysis, the CCTV footage, it appears that in cases where the female is the perpetrator, the situation is not taken seriously by the bystanders. and in cases with a male perpetrator, they are not likely to be stopped. The qualitative paradigm used in this study was chosen in order to provide full context of the surroundings of the incident, to be able to judge the bystanders adequately, as the paradigm deals with the ontology, which is the fundamentals of being, epistemology, the theory of knowledge, and research methodology. This research tool, along with the use of the footage, enabled them to gather enough information to reach their results, witness secondhand, and monitor reactions, or rather the why to the lack thereof.
As for the limitations within this article, the fact that the man initiated an attack at a woman in incident 3 before the woman had begun her own attack in the 4th incident might have indicated that the attack was vengeful to the bystanders. In this case, the bystanders may have felt the man deserved the violence or motivated the assault. A more genuine reaction may have occurred if incident 4 took place in front of people who had not witnessed the first event or if it happened in a different location entirely. The level of violence bestowed by the female perpetrators in the 4th incident was not as brutal as the violence in the first 2 incidences for comparison. While the idea that women pose a less physical threat to men has been previously stated, it is still unclear how this perception could guide bystander reactions when a woman uses such brutal force on a man as can be seen in the first 2 incidents. Perhaps this perception could be reversed when a woman is physically stronger than the male victim or relevant to the victim's gender as a man. The duration of the assault in Incident 1 could also be considered as a limitation as it did not allow bystanders enough time to intervene if they had wanted to. The assault being only 10 seconds may not have been considered enough time for people to properly assess the situation as it was such an emergency. Even if the bystanders recognized it as an emergency requiring immediate intervention, they would likely still need several more seconds to come up with the best line of action. Another limitation within this article is based on the author's exclusive reliance on what could be seen in the videos. It is easy to understand how incidents 1, 3, and 4 started and ended, however that is not the case for incident 2. The fact that the video recorded incidents also often lack sound is also a limitation which applies to this analysis to an extent. While the incidents 3 and 4 have sound, resulting in both physical and verbal reactions being analyzed, this is not the case in incidents 1 and 2 which did not have any sound. Therefore, if there is any type of verbal interventions outside of the camera's view, they would not be established in these incidents. The article concluded that both male and female bystanders were empathetic to a female victim and because of that intervened to save her, but at the same time could not care less about the male. Both incidents 3 and 4 commenced in the same environment and in the presence of similar gender compositions and a similar class of people, this making the incidents much easier to compare than other incidents. The fast acting to save the female victim and lack of intervention for the male victim through the period of the assaults, in spite of the fact that the man was being more violently victimized, prompts the idea that male victims of female assaults are unlikely to be assisted by the public. Men pose a physical advantage and are generally more likely to intervene than a woman in dangerous situations. Therefore, some observers may exonerate female bystanders from the same responsibilities in the incidents. However, some may see that intervention does not necessarily have to be physical. Both incidents 1 and 2 were dangerous emergencies that would typically force the bystanders to recognize the danger the victims were in and therefore compel them to intervene when they never did. The current idea is that the dangers of an emergency is enough to override the diffusion of responsibility. One of the implications of the results of this article based off of Incident 4 is that male victims of gender-based violence executed by women are unlikely to be helped by bystanders as they would just not show sympathy to the former. This lack of attention can be destructive when a serious act of violence is involved, as a man could become seriously injured or even killed while bystanders think the female attacker does not pose any serious threat to him or that the man is capable of saving himself. Thank you for listening to our presentation on gender bias favoring women and bystander reactions to emergencies.